For years, everyone thought he was just the old man with a mop. But the truth about him was something none of us ever expected. Most people pass through high school and remember the teachers who inspired them, the coaches who pushed them, maybe even the classmates who made their lives a little brighter or a little harder. But very few people ever stop to think about the quiet figures who keep everything moving. The ones who don't stand in the spotlight, but without whom the place would simply fall apart. At my high school, that figure was a man named Harold Miller. To most of the students, he was just a janitor, the man in a faded cap with a back that always seemed hunched over, his face hidden beneath wrinkles carved by years of exhaustion. He spoke little, and when he did, it was usually to himself. If you ever passed him in the hallway, you might hear him muttering a few words, like he was caught up in some conversation no one else could hear. Every morning, while the rest of us were still asleep, Harold was already at the school. The cafeteria was spotless because of him. The trash cans were never overflowing because of him. The bathrooms, which we all took for granted, were kept clean because he quietly scrubbed them while everyone else went about their day. He was the invisible backbone of our school, and yet nobody ever treated him like that. Some kids laughed at him. They mimicked the way his cart squeaked as he pushed it through the halls. They joked about the smell of cleaning chemicals that seemed to follow him everywhere. A few even mocked the way he walked, slowly, with a limp that made every step look painful. Teachers treated him politely, but even they never seemed to go beyond a distant nod. No one asked him how he was doing. No one asked him about his life. No one, not even once, treated him as anything more than the janitor. I'll admit something shameful. I wasn't much different. I noticed him, of course. You couldn't not notice Harold. But I never really saw him, not until much later. There was one small moment, though, that stuck with me. It was sophomore year. I dropped my lunch tray right in the middle of the cafeteria. Food and juice spilled everywhere, and the laughter from the other kids hit me like a wave. My face burned with embarrassment. I froze, not knowing whether to pick it all up or just run away. Then Harold appeared out of nowhere. He knelt down, wiped up the mess, and slid the tray away. He didn't say a word. He didn't give me a look of disappointment or annoyance. He just glanced at me, and in that 1 second, there was something in his eyes. Something like understanding, maybe even kindness. Then he went back to his car and disappeared again. At the time, I brushed it off, just Harold doing his job. But years later, I would remember that moment like it was burned into my mind. And then came the Monday morning that changed everything. I was sitting in homeroom when the intercom crackled to life. The principal's voice was somber, softer than I'd ever heard it before. "Students, we are saddened to inform you that Mr. Harold Miller, our longtime custodian, passed away this weekend." The room fell completely silent. For the first time in years, I noticed something strange. There was no squeak of Harold's cart in the hallway, no quiet hum of his mop hitting the tiles, just silence. Most of us didn't know how to react. Some kids shrugged, a few muttered things like, "That's sad," but then went right back to their conversations. Teachers looked down at their desks, clearly shaken, but no one said much. He was gone, just like that. But that week, as the staff began to clean out Harold's small storage room at the very end of the hall, they stumbled onto something none of us could have imagined. Behind the shelves stacked with cleaning supplies, behind the mop buckets and boxes of gloves, they found a small wooden chest. It was old, with scratches carved deep into the lid and the lock that looked like it hadn't been opened in years. Nobody even knew Harold kept it there. And when they opened that box, that's when the truth about Harold Miller, the man that we had all ignored, began to unravel. It was a kind of truth that would make every single one of us stop and rethink everything we thought we knew about him, about our school, about the people we take for granted every single day. The chest wasn't very large, maybe 2 feet wide, 1 foot tall, the kind of thing you might expect to find tucked away in an attic, filled with family photographs or old war medals. But this one had been buried in Harold's janitor closet for who knows how many years, surrounded by bleach and garbage bags. When the lock finally snapped open with a little effort, the teachers and staff who stood around gasped at what was inside. Word spread fast, and by the time the box's content had been carefully removed and laid out on a table in the teacher's lounge, everyone was whispering about it. Students began to catch wind too, rumors traveling down hallways quicker than wildfire. Inside of the chest were photographs, dozens of them, faded, black and white, edges curled with age. Some showed a young man in a military uniform, standing tall, chest out, medals shining on his jacket. Others captured moments of triumph. A younger Harold, no doubt about it, standing in front of crowds, shaking hands with men in suits, giving speeches that would look like official ceremonies. And then there were the newspaper clippings, articles with headlines so unbelievable, kids at school thought it had to be some kind of joke at first. Local war hero returns home. Sergeant Harold Miller honored for bravery in combat. Community celebrates soldier who saved dozens under fire. The more they read, the more the shock spread. Our janitor, the man students mocked for the squeak of his cart and the smell of bleach, had once been a hero. He hadn't just served, he had been decorated, honored. One article described how during a mission overseas, his unit had been pinned down under relentless fire. Men were screaming, injured, and the chance of survival was slim. But Harold, barely older than some of the seniors in our school, had run back into danger again and again, dragging wounded soldiers to safety. At least 12 men owed their lives to him. Another clipping showed a photograph of him standing alongside his fellow soldiers, a medal of valor pinned to his chest, his smile bright, his shoulders squared with pride. And yet, that wasn't the end of the story. Because tucked among the photos and articles were letters, dozens of them, bundled together with a frayed piece of string. They were written in Harold's own hand, letters he never sent. Some were addressed to family members, a mother long since gone, a younger brother he seemed to be begging for forgiveness from. Others were written to no one in particular, as if Harold had needed to pour his heart out onto paper because he couldn't say the words aloud. And those letters revealed a man tormented by guilt. In one, Harold wrote, "They call me a hero, but they don't see the faces of the ones I couldn't save. Every night they come back to me. Every night I hear their voices." Another letter said, "I thought if I came back, I'd start a family, build something better, but I didn't. I lost myself. And maybe this job, maybe this school, maybe it's the only place left where I can still feel useful." As the teachers read these words aloud, a silence hung in the air, so heavy it was suffocating. For the first time, students began to understand. Harold hadn't just been a janitor. He had been carrying something far heavier than a mop or a bucket. He had been carrying the weight of a past he could never escape. The discovery shook our school in ways nobody expected. Kids who had mocked him now whispered in shame. Teachers who had barely acknowledged him wiped tears from their eyes. Even the principal, a stern man rarely seen showing emotion, sat down with his head in his hands. But perhaps the most powerful reaction came from those who remembered moments, little moments where Harold's quiet kindness had touched them. A student who recalled Harold fixing a broken locker when no one else would, another who remembered him offering a sandwich when they had forgotten lunch. All these small acts of humanity suddenly took on new meaning. It was as if in death, Harold was finally being seen for the first time. And yet, the biggest shock was still to come. Because at the very bottom of that chest, folded neatly in an envelope yellowed with age, was a final letter. This one wasn't written decades ago. It was recent. And it was addressed to us, to the students of Riverside High.
The envelope was fragile, its paper thin and brittle, the kind that crumbles if you touch it too hard. The principal carefully opened it, and inside was a single folded sheet of paper. The handwriting was unmistakable, Harold Miller's neat, precise script, each letter carefully formed despite years of laborious work with tired hands. He began not with his own story, but with ours. Dear students of Riverside High, if you are reading this, then I am gone. I know most of you never really saw me while I was alive. That's fine. You didn't need to. My job wasn't to be noticed. But I want you to know you mattered to me. As the principal's voice carried the words into the classroom via the PA system, something shifted. Kids froze in their seats, their usual chatter silenced by the weight of the moment. I've walked these halls for decades, watching you grow, learning your name silently, noticing your struggles when no one else did. I've left small things behind, sometimes a note of encouragement in your locker, a coin in the vending machine when you had none, a repaired bike chain or a cleaned-up mess you never noticed. I never did it for thanks. I did it because I could, and because I believe that small acts of kindness matter, even if invisible. Some students began to whisper, He did that? I remember a note in my locker. The memories began flooding back, fragments of Harold's quiet generosity suddenly visible in their minds. He wrote about the children whose parents couldn't afford lunch and how he secretly paid for it. About the students struggling with broken school supplies or torn uniforms and how he fixed them in the dead of night so no one would know. About letters of encouragement left anonymously, tucked where they would be discovered when hope felt distant. I may have been invisible, but that doesn't mean I didn't see you. I believed in you. I wanted you to know you could do more than you thought, even when life seemed hard. Keep going. Be kind to one another. That is the real victory. By the time the letter ended, the staff and students were stunned. Tears ran freely. Silence hung like a weight in the air, broken only by the occasional sniffle or gasp. Every student who had ignored him, laughed at him, or simply walked past him felt a pang of regret. How could they have missed such a life lived in the shadows, yet so profoundly affecting theirs? Even teachers were shaken. Some quietly admitted they had never known how much Harold had done, how carefully he had watched, and how deeply he had cared for every child who passed through those halls. The principal, a man of few words, simply shook his head, muttering, "We failed him by not seeing him." In that moment, the old janitor who had seemed insignificant, awkward, and unremarkable became larger than life. Not because of wealth or fame, but because he had spent decades leaving an invisible trail of compassion that now glowed in full view. Students who had once mocked his squeaky cart now told stories of him fixing their bikes or leaving coins for lunch. Teachers recalled his subtle but unwavering support for students who struggled in silence. Even the hallway seemed different, somehow more alive, as if Harold's spirit lingered there, smiling quietly, satisfied. And yet, there was one thing everyone realized. This wasn't just nostalgia. Harold's letter was a challenge, a call to action, to notice, to care, to make the invisible visible in their own lives. By the end of the day, Riverside High had changed. Students lingered in hallways a little longer, teachers nodded more kindly, and the empty space left by Harold Miller was no longer just absence. It was a presence that reminded everyone that greatness isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's sweeping the halls before sunrise, unnoticed, leaving a legacy that only reveals itself when you finally pay attention. The next morning, Riverside High felt different. Students arrived carrying not just backpacks, but a new awareness. Teachers lingered in classrooms sharing memories of Harold and discussing small ways to honor his legacy. Something had shifted, subtly but profoundly. The school had been reminded that kindness, even when unseen, was powerful. In homeroom, kids exchanged stories. One sophomore spoke up timidly. "Last year, I left my lunch money at home. Someone had left $1 in my locker." It was him, wasn't it? Heads nodded. Memories bubbled to the surface. A note here, a repaired book there, a kind word when they had felt invisible. Harold's presence, once overlooked, now glimmered in every memory. The staff gathered for a meeting, and the principal shared a plan. Harold believed in quiet action. He never sought recognition. But we can honor him. We'll start a scholarship fund for students in need, funded anonymously in his name, just as he would have wanted it. And we'll make sure our hallways aren't only clean, but filled with care for each other, not just for the school. By lunchtime, students had started small, spontaneous acts of kindness. One girl handed a sandwich to a younger student who had forgotten theirs. A group of seniors helped clean up the cafeteria tables without being asked. In the library, someone left a note of encouragement in a textbook. It was as though Harold's invisible hands were guiding them, showing that paying attention mattered. Even the teachers, long hardened by years of routine, felt a ripple of change. They took the time to check in with students struggling silently, offering help and guidance. The school counselors noticed fewer lonely faces in the halls, more students reaching out to each other. The story of Harold Miller spread beyond the school. Parents were told, and soon community members were visiting, bringing donations for the scholarship fund. Local media caught wind of the janitor whose quiet generosity had transformed a school. Articles were written, not about heroic acts in battle, but about the simple, profound power of noticing and helping others. One day, a young student who had been particularly shy approached the principal. "I want to help like Harold did," she said. Her eyes sparkled with determination. And that was the point. Harold's influence was no longer confined to memory. It was alive in actions, in decisions, in the way people treated each other. The janitor who had been invisible had, in death, revealed something profound. Legacy isn't measured in fame or recognition. It's measured in the lives you touch, often without anyone noticing. Harold had taught the school that lesson silently, but now it was impossible to ignore. Hallways that once echoed with laughter at his expense now resonated with gratitude and care. Students looked out for one another. Teachers noticed the small struggles. And in every action, no matter how minor, there was a whisper of Harold's enduring message: kindness matters. By the end of the school year, Riverside High had transformed. It was subtle, a shift in atmosphere rather than a grand event, but those who experienced it knew something had changed forever. Harold Miller, the quiet janitor, had left a legacy stronger than any plaque, medal, or ceremony. His life proved that one person, unnoticed, could change countless lives, if only they cared enough to act quietly but consistently. And sometimes, when a student picked up a piece of trash, repaired a broken locker, or left a kind note for someone who looked invisible, it was as though Harold was still walking the halls with us. Months passed since Harold Miller's death, yet his presence was everywhere. Students no longer overlooked the quiet gestures around them. Every small act of kindness, a smile, a note, a helping hand, felt like an echo of him. Harold had shown that true impact doesn't need a spotlight. The scholarship fund in his name had grown quickly. Students who once struggled in silence now received support, tuition, supplies, even meals. The community rallied, inspired by the story of the janitor whose invisible life had quietly transformed so many. Teachers began incorporating lessons about empathy, noticing others, and humility. Harold had unknowingly taught them all. One afternoon, during an assembly, the principal shared a letter from a student. "Dear Mr. Miller, I never knew you while you were alive, but now I understand. You taught me that being kind doesn't require recognition, that helping others can change lives, even if nobody sees. Thank you for showing me what it means to truly care." The room was silent. Many wiped tears from their eyes. Some students hugged each other, realizing the truth of Harold's message. Greatness is quiet, and sometimes the most important people are the ones who go unnoticed. In the hallways, students had started leaving notes of encouragement for each other, little reminders that someone sees them, someone cares. The custodial staff, inspired by Harold's dedication, continued his legacy with pride, mentoring younger students not just in school maintenance, but in small acts of compassion. Even outside the school, Harold's story spread. Local newspapers, social media, and community groups celebrated the man who had lived a life of quiet heroism. But Harold's reward wasn't fame or accolades. It was the ripple of goodness he left behind, the kindness that multiplied in ways he could never have imagined. Years later, alumni would return to Riverside High, telling stories of the old janitor nobody noticed. They shared memories of notes, small gifts, and gestures of care that had inspired them in moments of struggle. They spoke of lessons learned silently but deeply, lessons about empathy, responsibility, and the invisible impact one person can have on a community. The school installed a small plaque near the janitor's closet, in honor of Harold Miller, who showed us that the quietest hearts can make the loudest difference. Students paused to read it, some smiling, some with tears. Many left a small token, a flower, a note, a kind word, keeping his spirit alive. And sometimes, when a student fixed a broken desk for someone else, helped a friend, or quietly paid it forward, it was as if Harold was still walking the halls, silently approving, silently smiling. He had been invisible in life, but in death, his legacy became impossible to ignore. Harold Miller had taught Riverside High the most powerful lesson of all, that a single life lived quietly with kindness can change the world, one unnoticed act at a time.